It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to this episode of You Can Make It with David Farrell. Today I'm going to make easy Italian herb focaccia. It's a wonderful bread, and as the title intones, it's actually easy to make. Doesn't require any kneading and very little rising, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. It's a really great recipe for when you have company over, for a side dish with spaghetti, and it even makes kind of a cool sandwich. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get into making our focaccia. We're going to start off with 360 grams or 12 3/4 ounces of all-purpose flour. Now, you can measure it with 3 cups or 750 milliliters, but flour tends to pack down, so you'd have to sift it first and level it off. Going by weight is much easier. So we'll just put the flour in a bowl. Now we're going to add some more dry ingredients. And what I have here is 2 1/4 teaspoons of quick rise yeast. It's not the regular yeast, it's a little finer, and it's important to use that variety in this recipe. So add that to your flour. So 2 1/4 teaspoons is about 12 or 13 milliliters. And then we're going to add 15 milliliters or 1 tablespoon of sugar and 5 milliliters or 1 teaspoon of salt. And we'll put that in with the dry ingredients. Now we're just going to stir those dry ingredients together. And we're just going to set this bowl aside for a second after we've got them stirred. And we're going to bring in 400 milliliters or 1 2/3 cup of water. And to that water, I'm going to add 25 milliliters of, or 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Now this recipe calls for 50 milliliters of olive oil altogether, so I have 50 milliliters in here. And I'm just going to measure out 25 milliliters of it into the water. Now, the water has to be warm. It has to be warmed up to between 120 and 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm just going to take this over to the microwave and microwave it for about 30 to 40 seconds and keep checking the temperature until it's between 120 and 130 degrees Fahrenheit. If you don't have a thermometer, just put your little pinky in there and it should feel quite warm but not hot. I've heated up the oil and the water to between 120 and 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and now that just has to be added into the dry ingredients. So we just need to pour them in and then stir. Now this isn't going to be like a bread dough. It's going to be quite sticky and almost like a batter. So we'll just carefully fold in all of the dry ingredients to that warm water. Now with most breads you have to knead it, and that gives you that fine texture you get in bread as it forms gluten. But focaccia has bigger bubbles, so you don't have to mix it as long or as much or knead it like you do regular bread. You just need to get all that flour moistened. It tends to like to not get all the flour in the bottom. There we go, that looks pretty good. So I've got it all mixed, and now we're just going to get our pan ready that we're going to cook it in. And now I have a 10-inch square pan here. You can use a 9 by 13 inch pan. It's the same, just a little different shape. And you want to spray it with some baking spray, just to give it a nice coating. That helps it from stick when you go to take it out. So now that you got the baking spray in it, you just want to dump the batter into the baking tray. And now that you got the batter in, you just need to push it out to the corners. It's not going to want to go because you've got the baking spray, so it'll be slippery. But just keep pressing and it'll eventually work its way into all four corners. There we go. Now don't worry about it being too level, just give it a shake. It will level out because this is going to sit for 30 minutes under a tea towel in a warm place, and that just gives it a bit of a rise to let the yeast go to work. So I will see you in 30 minutes. So our focaccia has risen for 30 minutes under the towel, and you'll see that it's really puffed up. Now you want to have an uneven surface on the top of this because we're going to be putting some olive oil on it. We want it to go into the indentations. So I just take a spoon handle and I put it in the olive oil to get it well covered, and I give a couple of pokes in. And just do that about every inch or two. That gives some indentations to make a real rich flavor from the olive oil into the focaccia. So remember, we started with 50 milliliters or 1/4 cup of olive oil, and we used half in making the dough. Now we're going to take the last 25 milliliters of the olive oil and just drizzle it over the top of the focaccia. Don't worry about getting it exactly, you just want it poured over. And then we're going to be putting some toppings onto the focaccia. And what we have here are 50 milliliters of a spicy sausage. You can use pepperoni if you like spicy. You can use your favorite salami, anything you like, but something that's got a fair amount of flavor. And you've also got 50 milliliters or 1/4 cup of Parmesan, grated Parmesan. And here I have 15 milliliters or 1 tablespoon of an Italian seasoning mix. So I like to start with the seasonings first. Just sprinkle them liberally over the surface of the focaccia. There we go. And then I like to put the meat next because I want the cheese to melt on top of it. So sprinkle the 50 milliliters of your spicy chopped up sausage over the top of the focaccia. I used a really spicy pepperoni because I like a little bit of bite in my focaccia. Make sure we get it all around out to the edges. And then our 50 milliliters or 1/4 cup of grated Parmesan. Now you're not trying to make a pizza, so don't put too much on. It's just to give it that really nice Parmesan flavor. Now this is going to go into a preheated 375 degree Fahrenheit oven for 30 to 35 minutes. And you can tell it's done by tapping the center if it feels kind of firm, but the best way is to use an instant read thermometer. And if it reads over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, your focaccia is cooked. So let's put this in the oven. It took about 34 to 35 minutes for the focaccia to get cooked. And like I say, I used my internal thermometer. When it gets to about 203 to 205 degrees with the internal thermometer, it's done. Or just touch it and make sure it isn't doughy. You can put a toothpick in and make sure no dough comes out. So once it's come out, you want to let it rest for about 10 to 15 minutes before you cut it. Otherwise it tends to tear. And then you just want to run a knife, make sure you're cutting through the bottom, and then cut it into whatever size pieces you want. I like a nice big piece. And we'll just take that out. And you can see it's not bread-like. It's much softer and moister than your regular bread. And if you let it cool a bit more, you can cut it and make sandwiches out of it. But the best way to eat it is just pick it up and take a bite. It is so moist and chewy, not like bread. The pepperoni gives it just a little bit of bite of heat. The cheese gives it a rich flavor, and that Italian seasoning just goes right through the whole thing. This is an absolutely delicious focaccia, and you can make it.
I have a good woman. I ain't good looking, but I do some cooking. I'm the old fat guy. So use that oven if you want some lovin'. Be like the old fat guy. Be like the old fat guy.